Okay.
Okay, so this is gonna be a rule of thumb. Anybody that comes up with something to say is gonna say that shit.
Okay. I'll invite people to have their cameras on.
Very kind. And I'm going to invite all of y'all over for dinner because this would be fun.
Yes, fam. I'm bringing the wine.
Okay, I'm here. I'm in Durham. Come on over.
I'm gonna be right here. My son lives here, so I come here all the time.
Okay.
Have we made Ian co-host?
I will do that right now.
Yeah, because if he's presenting something,
I'm not gonna do anything formal. It'll just be more like remarks.
Tanya, do you also want to be Tony?
you muted yourself. Yeah.
I'm Tonya, and I don't have slides. I don't need to co-host anything.
Okay, my question is how to pronounce your name also, because I feel like I just said it wrong.
It's Tonya.
Tonya, okay, got it. Okay, guys, we're on YouTube. I'm gonna put the link in the chat for us right now so that you all can like send it. I don't know if you have friends who are coming, family, if you want to email it out. Once I figure that out, and it looks like the chat is working. If you all want to, I'm actually gonna ask you to go in and try and write in the chat.
Okay.
Make sure that it's working. But first, there we go.
I love how all you got to do is click on it and it goes straight to it. So phenomenal.
On what?
Put that second YouTube link. Oh no, there it is. Okay.
This is the one I just put. The other ones are from before.
Oh, look at us.
Okay, great. Right in the chat.
But why does my hat look crooked in YouTube Live but not in the Zoom? This is what inquiring minds want to know. Okay.
Yep. So the chat works.
Great. All right. We've got a YouTube link. We've got the chat. We have 14 people in the waiting room. It's 7. Do we want to let people in right at 7 or do we want to wait a little bit?
I think we should let them in. And I'm going to put this, I'm going to post this on Nextdoor.
You're sharing, right? Sorry, that didn't make any sense. You're a host, a co-host. You're sharing the hostiness with me, Yolanda?
Me?
Yeah.
I can.
No, I mean literally, like on there. Like, do you see the waiting room and stuff?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Okay. No, I can let them in. I just couldn't tell if you could see who was in the waiting room or not.
I can.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna just admit all. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. All right, let's go.
We can go ahead and get started. People come in as they come.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hello. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Fantastic.
Good. That's a good answer. Great energy.
We're going to encourage people to have their cameras on.
Oh, okay, cool. Sorry about that.
At the beginning. Yeah, not everybody can.
That's okay.
That's great.
Yeah, I noticed with my students this morning, I didn't have enough bandwidth to keep it live. So,
Jonathan, good to
It
see you.
happened.
yeah,
I got my iPad. I can't get it on there.
good to see you as well, my friend.
Well, if you want to sit down there. I don't have our face showing. Here, you can hold this.
We don't need to have our face.
I know that. So,
All right, so we're gonna get started here shortly, and when we do, we're gonna
get it on here.
we're going.
You just got muted. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That was my fault.
It's okay. That's what I was actually announcing. So thank you there.
Great. Great minds think alike.
Yeah, because we want to make sure that we stay on task. We only have 1 hour. We have quite a few questions, and we are streaming on we're streaming on YouTube Live. So we want to make sure that we have everything together so that when our hosts are speaking, we can hear everything that they have to say, and we don't have any distractions, so we can get all the good stuff that we need from this very important presentation. Thank y'all so much for coming. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with who I am. My name is Yolanda Whitted. I have the blessing and the privilege to have founded the Anti-Racism Coalition of Washington, D.C. I work with some of the most beautiful and pragmatic people in the city. And what we're working on is designing an anti-racism framework that works in communities where we can actually come together as a one people and with one clear vision to actually support one another and to understand each other better. Because we understand that when we understand one another, then we actually can do great things together as a community. So without further ado, I am going to do a warm handoff to one of the most gracious, intelligent, and tech-savvy people I know, Ms. Elena Ross.
Thank you, Yolanda. I'm turning red. Hi, I'm Elena Ross. I have the pleasure of working with Yolanda on the Anti-Racism Coalition of DC since June. And with her for much longer, we're both teachers at DC International School. And I see some other teachers from DCI here. So hi guys, thanks for coming. Tonight I'm going to be doing most of the tech stuff behind the scenes. I'm making sure that we're also live on YouTube right now. So if you want to get that link or send that link, maybe you have people who are sick of Zoom but might go on YouTube. The link is in the chat right now. If you personally are having any tech issues or become aware of any, you can message me directly, Elena, in the chat, just find my name. But that's it. I'm really excited. I think this is a really, really important event, and I'm so glad that everyone came. Thank you for making the time. Now I'm going to warmly hand off to Nina.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nina Hazen. I'm so glad you're here. Let me just say a little bit about our two panelists who are going to be presenting tonight. So Dr. Ian Simon is you're an ANC representative, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Here in DC, and also a trained PhD in vaccine microbiology. And so he's going to talk to us tonight a lot about how vaccines get made and how we know that this vaccine is trustworthy, and try to answer people's questions about, is the vaccine safe? And then my good friend Tonya Petit is joining us from Chapel Hill, or Raleigh, Durham. Tonya and I worked together in the US government some years ago. She's been a practicing physician's assistant for many years, and also studies equity issues in health. And she'll talk to us both as a healthcare provider, but also as someone who's had the vaccine, about how she made her decision. And so I'm going to hand over to Tonya now. She'll tell you a little bit more about herself, and then Ian is going to give us some background information. And my other job tonight will be pulling questions during the question and answer from the chat and helping make sure that they get answered. And I'll go on mute for now. Tonya, over to you. You're on mute.
Thank you. I was being controlled and I wasn't allowed to unmute. Hi, everyone. As Nina said, my name is Tonya Petit. I'm a physician assistant, and I've been doing primarily HIV care and infectious disease for the last 25 years. And I guess there's going to be a little time later for me to go into depth about my decision making, but I did want to share with folks that I wasn't sure if I was going to take the vaccine when it was first available. And I had the same, I think, very similar issues and concerns around trust. And I really looked at what I could find around what I knew about COVID-19 and how dangerous and deadly a disease it is, and what I knew about vaccines in general, and what I read about this vaccine in particular, and how that went into making my decision. So I can talk more about that if folks are interested. And I also received my second vaccine dose of the Pfizer vaccine on Tuesday of last week, so 1 week ago. So I can also talk about what my experience was like after the first shot and after the second shot. And I will turn it over to Ian.
Thanks, Tonya. And evening, everybody. So as Nina said, I have a PhD in vaccine development. Been studying viruses for gosh, 15 or so years, and then moved into more of the policies and practices around science. And I've been doing that for about 10 years now at the national level. I'm also a locally elected representative, an advisory neighborhood commissioner here in Washington, D.C. in Ward 2. I see our former council member is on the line, so welcome. And so what, both from thinking about COVID at a national level, at a local level, how it's affecting our neighbors, and then from the perspective of a scientist, it just, for me, just feels like I have been hearing many different types of questions from a few different sources. And so whenever I can, I just like to give a little bit of information, sort of the background. A lot of folks are really up to speed with the news and reading up on as much as they can from news sources, but sometimes you have to get into sort of into the weeds and then pull up really some lessons learned. So I figured I'd start there. So as you all know, we have 2 vaccines that have been approved by the FDA for emergency authorization here in the US, and they've been rolled out ever since late December. Those 2 vaccines are made by Moderna and Pfizer, and they both use the same type of technology. By technology meaning just biology technology. A lot of folks have been thinking about, what's in that vaccine. Do they use eggs? Do they use the actual coronavirus? The answer to both of those is no. They also don't use any preservatives. So those vaccines are essentially made up of 4 simple ingredients, relatively simple ingredients. You've got what they call mRNA, which is a strand of nucleotides. It's what DNA encodes mRNA, and that encodes proteins. So this mRNA, and it encodes the protein for the surface of the coronavirus, the spike protein. So that is wrapped up in lipids, lipid nanoparticles. Lipids are found in the membranes of every single cell in our body. So in fact, they're used because our bodies are so good at having our cell membranes keep what's in our cells and keep everything that's out of our cells. And so it makes a really good vehicle to deliver the mRNA. Then in addition to that, there's different saline solutions. So that will regulate both the pH and the salt content, so that, if once injected, it won't burn. For instance, if you think pouring like lemon juice on an open wound, right? The pH, extreme pH differences actually cause that to sting. So these saline buffers buffer that. And then finally, sucrose, sugar, just essentially sugar water is what makes up the rest of the vial. So those are the 4 ingredients to the vaccine. People always ask me about how effective is it, how safe is it, and what are the side effects. So these 2 vaccines are very effective. They're some of the most effective vaccines that have been deployed, 95%, up to 95% effective. It takes 2 doses though to get there. After the first dose, it's about 50% effective. And then you need the second dose to make it 95% effective. The Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines were created separately. And so when you get one, you're asked to have the second dose of that same vaccine. So if you get the first dose Moderna, go ahead and make sure you get your second dose is also Moderna. There's no, there have been no studies to see what happens if you swap them out. We really don't know if it helps, hurts in terms of effectiveness. So they just urge you to stick with the same manufacturer. Then you've got a third vaccine, which is just finished its phase 3 trials. That's the last phase before they go for approval. That's by Johnson & Johnson. It's a 1-dose vaccine and it has a little bit lower efficacy of the trial folks in the trials in the US. They were about 85% effective. But they are safe. And by safe, meaning They've been in the clinical studies, all three together. Over 100,000 people have taken the vaccines. Only a handful have had some severe side effects. And then once investigated, they went to the hospital, doctors investigated, they were found that those severe side effects did not correlate with the vaccine. Now, what we do know, though, is that in very, very rare cases, there are some folks that do have severe side effects, especially if they have a history of being allergic to other vaccines. They can sometimes go into what's called anaphylaxis, where they might have hives and their immune system overheats. The latest data that has been published says that has been the case for only of the first 4 million people vaccinated in the US, only 10 people actually had anaphylaxis. So it's roughly 2 per million, which is extremely rare in terms of a severe side effect. On the other hand, if you think about the severe side effects for actually getting COVID, of course, sadly, the most severe side effect is death. And the chances of someone contracting COVID and dying between the ages of 60 and 70 are about 1 in 10. And over 70 is about 1 in 4. So the chances of the most severe side effect of getting COVID for vulnerable populations is 1 in 4, it will die, or having the vaccine and taking it as a preventive measure from those really severe effects of COVID is, 2.5 in a million. And then even then, the severe side effect is a allergic reaction that can be treated right there when you get your vaccine. So when you get the vaccine, they ask you to wait for about 15, 20 minutes right there in the facility in case you do have a reaction. Most folks have, if they are going to get a reaction, have it in the first 5 to 10 minutes. And then there's an EpiPen that they'll have there to treat you with. So, especially in these emergency situations, FDA is approving these vaccines, weighing the risks and benefits of the actual disease, this actual deadly disease that has taken over 400,000 American lives, and weighed that against the very small chance of these side effects of allergic reactions. Of course, there are more common side effects: pain at the injection site, maybe fatigue, headaches. That is much more common, but only lasts a day or so, and a much better alternative than to actually get COVID. All right, with that, I will stop and turn it back over to Nina.
Hey, y'all, let's turn over to Tonya and have Tonya talk a little bit about her decision-making process, and get your questions ready. If you didn't submit them before, you can put them in the chat here on Zoom, or you can put them in the chat on the YouTube live channel.
Thanks, Nina. So about, I guess, a few months ago, or a couple weeks before the Christmas holiday, the vaccines became available at my workplace. And I think, like most states, our state, North Carolina, was vaccinating people according to priority lists. So number 1 was healthcare workers, and then number 2 was people over 75, and now we're at people over 65. So I knew that the vaccine was going to be offered to me as part of that group of healthcare workers first. And so I needed to make some decisions about what I was going to do when it was offered to me. And I thought about several things. I thought a lot about COVID, and I thought about the people that I knew who had gotten COVID and survived, and how many of them continue to have side effects and symptoms well into months after they contracted COVID. So I think the last thing I saw says about 10% or more of people who get COVID have what they call long COVID, where they continue to feel extremely tired, where it's hard for them to breathe, where they have what's called a brain fog. And that's, 1 in 10 people. So I thought about the folks that I knew that experienced that and how common that was. And then I thought about the number that Ian said about how many people actually died from COVID. And as time went on, more and more people in my life, so parents of my friends, cousins, people closer and closer to my family were getting ill and were dying. So I weighed that on one hand, knowing that, you know, I also had an opportunity to protect myself. So even though I work in a clinic, I work in a place where I wear a mask, the patients wear a mask. I wear goggles or a face shield when I'm in with the patient. I wash my hands. I'm very careful. But I also know that I go to the grocery store. And in the grocery store, there are no windows. And there are lots of other people who have touched things and breathed on things and are in proximity to me that I can't control. And I have to do that because I have to eat, and I can't afford to do whatever the Instacart thing is. It has like a 6-month waiting list and costs twice as much as your groceries. So I knew that I needed to do that, and that there was a possibility that I would be exposed no matter how careful I was. So that was on one hand. And then I thought, well, what do I know about vaccines in general? I know that I get the flu vaccine every year, and I never had any problem with the flu vaccine. I did know this is a different kind of vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, and I was very curious about that. So I looked up the woman who'd been researching mRNA vaccines for 30 years and nobody paid her any attention, and all of a sudden she's super famous now. So I knew that there'd been many, many years of research that went into this kind of a vaccine. And then when the coronavirus epidemic happened, then there was a use for all of this research, and they translated that quickly because they had money and access that was given to them by the government to do it more quickly than typical research, which takes a long time because people are waiting to get money for this phase and then money for that phase and money for the next phase. And then I looked at how many people, this is before the vaccine had started being deployed, so about 40,000 people in one vaccine study and about 30,000 people in another vaccine study. And from what I had seen, no one had died, unlike all the people I knew who died from COVID. And I think the biggest concern people were talking about at the time was the Bell's palsy, the 4 people that had Bell's palsy. And I thought, you know, 40,000 people and 4 people get Bell's palsy. Bell's palsy is not life-threatening. It's like one side of your face droops. It's not a stroke. I have an uncle who lived a great life with Bell's palsy. And I weighed that against the possibility of long COVID and of death. And I decided that it was worth it to me. And it wasn't without trepidation, but I went and got the vaccine, and the first dose was super easy. I actually didn't even feel the needle go in. I was like, did she really give it to me? Then I had to wait around for about 30 minutes and nothing happened. And then I went home and my arm was a little sore. So I was like, okay, I must have gotten it because my arm's sore. And then I got my second dose last week on Tuesday. And that's when I got what everybody talked about, the sort of immune system boost. I was very tired. My body ached. I wasn't really thinking as clearly as I wanted to be thinking, and I just needed to go to bed. And that lasted about, I'd say 24 to 36 hours. And the next day I was feeling fine. And a week later, I'm feeling fine. And I'm really, really grateful. I was telling folks on the call beforehand that just yesterday, I found out that 3 other members of my family died of COVID yesterday. And because I got vaccinated, my parents felt safe enough to get vaccinated, and my father's completed both of his doses, and my mother's completed one of hers and is scheduled for the next one soon. And I'm really, really grateful and feel like I have an opportunity to keep my parents with me as long as I can, with less worry about them losing them to COVID. And I'm going to stop talking now because I'm going to cry. So putting myself on mute.
This is a tear-friendly space, but I just want to open now to questions. And again, just to say, I'm so glad everyone's here and you're all very welcome. And our particular priority in this event is to make sure that African-American Black residents of DC and of the nation get a chance to ask their questions. And so I would just ask people to be thoughtful as you post questions in the chat. And the first one I see is from Natalie Bacon. So if a person has had COVID, do they need to take the shot? This is, I think, a big question for a lot of people. And we'll also just emphasize that neither Tonya nor Ian is here in their medical capacity. So this is something you should definitely talk about with your provider, but they can certainly give you their sense of that question. You want to try it, Tonya?
I can, although I'm sure Ian has the same answer. The current guidelines is that even if you've had COVID, that it doesn't make you ineligible for the vaccine. So I think at our clinic, we just talked about this morning. We have a Tuesday morning huddle before a clinic, and we talked about folks who've had COVID and how long they should wait after they've recovered before they get the vaccine. So it's definitely not a contraindication. There's just a question of how long do you wait afterwards. I don't know, Ian, if you want to add more super virology to that.
Yeah, no, couldn't have said it better myself. I think the only added wrinkle, and it's a wrinkle, it's not a yes or no answer to this, is I think this last week a new study came out comparing the immune response that folks, for some of the first folks that have gone through the trials, their immune response was a slight bit stronger than the immune response generated by folks who got COVID sort of naturally. And so it's a small study, only dealing with maybe a couple hundred folks in each side, but it does appear that getting the vaccine will give you could give you a more protective response. So it might be a good idea to talk with your doctor and then go ahead and get the vaccine if recommended.
Yolanda, you want to tee up the next question?
Yeah. So thank y'all so much for answering those questions. That question. So I have a question from, these are the pre-submitted questions. What is the difference in the antibodies I have now after my COVID illness and the antibodies generated by the vaccine, i.e. protection factors, length of time of antibodies in the blood, etc.? And either of you can actually answer that question, whoever wants to jump in.
Oh, that's an Ian question for sure.
Yeah, thanks. So, so from what we've seen, when you get the first dose, as we said, is about 50% protective. That's going to, I guess, the protection generated, which is most often people have seen that's antibody protection. So it's proteins that are circulating through your body, kind of searching for virus to neutralize it, clamp it down. That peaks around 2 weeks after you get your injection. And then you wait another 7 to 14 days, you get your second dose. And the peak of your response will be, I think, 2 weeks after that. And then you should be really, really well protected. Again, the first two vaccines are up to 95% protective. Now, what we mean by protective and what these studies showed was essentially protecting people from getting ill, from getting sick enough that they have to go to the hospital, not protecting them from getting the virus, right? So it's not a total repelling of the virus out of your body. Be gone, virus. It's more of a, if you get it, you will tolerate it as if it is nothing special. You can go on with your day. You don't even notice you might have it. And then your body will eliminate it quickly, probably so quick that you may not show up if you get a COVID test 7 days, 10 days, 14 days after. But that's sort of what that protection means, is that you're protected from the worst effects of COVID. And there was like a third part to that question. I forget it already, Yolanda.
Okay, yeah, sure. Pull that question back up. So the last part is what says, what is the difference in the antibodies I have now after COVID illness and the antibodies generated by the vaccine? And it just basically gives some examples: protection factors, length of time of antibodies in the blood, etc. Yeah.
So I just think we slightly covered it. They think that folks who get the vaccine have a slightly stronger immune response. The other thing is that the initial results from folks who have gotten COVID naturally is they think your peak antibody, your peak immune response lasts about 8 months and then starts to wane. That's the natural infection. They're not sure what that length of time is for folks who are getting vaccinated. Likely longer, but we're still not sure. You haven't had enough time yet to track those folks who are continually being tracked and monitored, and go see doctors to make sure there are no side effects, but also to make sure that they understand how long the protection lasts. So that's still to come.
Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to actually, I just got another question in the chat. So it also has to do with the long-term effects of the vaccine. Is there a way to anticipate possible long-term consequences? And it says, I'm concerned about the long-term effects of the vaccine.
Is there a way to anticipate it? I mean, the only, so I'd say, number one, probably no way to anticipate it. You know, a lot of what we are going through with COVID is, it's new, right? It's a novel virus. It's a new pandemic. We're still learning as we go. But part of that is making sure we're gathering information at every stage possible and making the best decisions with the information that we have. And all information indicates that there will be no long-term effects from this vaccine. You know, we mentioned all the ingredients. There's only one ingredient, these lipids that have even been shown to create any kind of reaction for someone's body. And we know it creates a reaction because lipids are used in lots of different medications and have been for years. And so we know some folks have a reaction to that. But it doesn't, I mean, with all those folks, those reactions to lipids don't have long-term effects, or there's no data to suggest they have long-term effects. So I'd say there's no data to suggest that there'll be long-term effects here. But of course, this is just the best information we have right now.
Thank you so much. Nina, you got the next question?
Yeah, so Sarah was wondering about those 4 study participants who got Bell's palsy. She thought that was in the number of people who've gotten the vaccine in the general population. Tonya, can you clarify that?
Yes, so there were people, the 4 people who got Bell's palsy that were also got the vaccine, and they did look at the rate of Bell palsy in the general population, and it's about the same. So there wasn't any way to say that the vaccine caused the Bell's palsy. Thank you for asking for clarification around that.
Excellent. Yolanda, you have another question teed up from the ones people submitted earlier?
I sure do. I've got so many questions, Nina. So many. All right. So the next question, this vaccine was approved under emergency authorization. Are there additional protocols for the regular authorization approval?
So maybe I'll take this one, and Tonya, if you have anything else afterwards. So emergency authorization from the FDA is essentially just a process by which the FDA kind of sets the standards by which they will even entertain seeing any data about a clinical trial. Those standards are not lower than normal, but they are essentially teed up ahead of time so that you know, the vaccine manufacturers know exactly how many folks to enroll. They know exactly how long they need to take out these trials. So the standards are the same, and then the information is provided to the FDA with sort of, this is the best we have that meets the high standard at the FDA at the time, and then it's considered as whether or not to have it released to the public with by weighing the benefits and risk of the current pandemic already going on. So that's really the only difference between that emergency use authorization and essentially standard FDA authorization. Mention that there's, you know, the government essentially said, you know, there will be money for these trials if you go ahead and conduct these trials, so that shortens the time. Also, some of the bureaucratic hurdles that tend to gum up the works are shortened in an emergency situation like the pandemic we're in. So, you know, the time it would take to assemble certain panels, they kind of shrink that time. The time and energy and effort that folks at the FDA will be spending to comb through data will be more intense during these emergency situations. So that's kind of what shortens the time that we've had to get to this authorization, rather than any kind of difference in the standards or safety safety requirements put forth for these vaccines to get authorization.
Thank you so much for that. Tanya, or do you have anything to add?
No, I'm just thinking like, it's as if, if you were going to make a new antibiotic and we already have like 50 antibiotics, I'd be like, well, we'll put you on the schedule when we get to you. But now you have a vaccine for something that's killing people. They're like, you get on the schedule tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's how I think about the difference between emergency use and regular approval.
Thank you. And so Nina, do you have another question? Because I have plenty questions.
I have a good question. After 8 months, will we have to get vaccinated again?
It's like,
It is. So I'd say in my estimation, again, there's no hard data yet, right, to say yes or no. But in my opinion, we will have to get another. We will be seeing this virus, as you guys have kind of been reading in the news, different variants coming out, and we've been seeing the virus change a bit, not to make it more lethal or anything, which is great, but it's changing transmissibility. So I think it's likely that we will, as a population, be seeing the need to get another vaccine, another round of vaccines, probably just one dose if you already had the first two from the one this year. Right, we might be seeing this kind of like the flu, that every year you would have to get not only a flu shot, but also a COVID shot.
Right.
Over to you, Yolanda.
Oh, I got the questions, child. I got the questions. All right. So the next question that I have is, after I take the vaccines, how will I know their efficacy? When will I take a new vaccine? I think that maybe they're talking about the 2 different doses and just calling them vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
When can I stop wearing the mask and things return to normal?
Yeah. So what I mentioned before about the vaccine really being the vaccine to protect you from getting sick, from going to the hospital, from having any kind of the COVID effects, definitely protecting you from death, but also protecting you from wheezing and chest pain and heart conditions. So that's all about protecting yourself. What we don't know yet is what it does in terms of stopping any kind of transmission to someone else. So you might have the vaccine and be protected, but if you're exposed to the virus, to COVID, there's a chance you could still transmit it to others. And in that case, then we will be wearing masks to protect other people for many months into the future, just like we're wearing masks to protect other people right now. I think Tony Fauci was just quoted today in a recent interview saying that he doesn't know exactly when we'll be returning to normal, being able to go out without a mask and no worries about getting COVID. So he said he couldn't really put a timetable on it. There's so many different factors to consider, getting enough of our population vaccinated, dealing with these circulating strains. So the answer is, my estimation is not for many, many months. We're talking September, October, November. And in Dr. Fauci's case, he wouldn't even put a time estimate on it, saying it's too hard to know right now.
And I would add, we've had challenges getting enough vaccine. I know here in North Carolina, we have way more capacity to vaccinate than we have actual doses of vaccine. So given that it's difficult to get everyone who wants to get vaccinated, forget people who aren't sure yet. Like, we can't even vaccinate the people who want to get vaccinated yet. It's going to take a long time, even if, this one set of vaccines provides sort of community protection, or what they sometimes call herd immunity, that even getting there is going to take a long time without even considering other strains.
Tonya and Ian, is there any evidence that the vaccine causes infertility? Do people need to worry about their fertility if they get the vaccine?
There's no evidence that I've seen that the vaccine has any effect on fertility whatsoever. I know a lot of my friends are pregnant or thinking about being pregnant and wondering about the vaccine. And so first, the medical advice is to check with your doctor. But then second, after that, there is no reason to believe that the vaccine has any going to have any effect on future fertility or current pregnancies.
I have a similar question. Someone asked about Crohn's disease, whether or not if they have a flare-up of their Crohn's disease, they should consider getting that shot.
Tonya, do you want to?
Well, I can do that thing that people hate where you say it depends, because it depends on the severity of the Crohn's disease. It depends on what your treatment is for the Crohn's disease and how that impacts your immune system as to whether your healthcare provider would recommend that you get the vaccine and at what point in the course of a flare-up that you would get it. But I would say you need to talk to your healthcare provider before just hopping into line, just to be careful and to be sure that you're doing it in a way that's consistent with the timeline of your disease and the safest time possible.
Thank you so much for that. So I have another question. How long does it take to, that is not the question I want to ask, hold on. A lot of people have been asking about what happens if you don't take that second vaccination shot. So the question is, do I have any protection if I don't get the second dosage?
Right. So the answer is partial protection, right? So they saw from this clinical studies that 50% of people that got just one dose still got a severe disease. When they got COVID, they still got the severe disease, and 50% did not. So there's some protection. I think the difference between 50% and 95 is drastic enough that hopefully everybody opts to go ahead and get that second dose, if at all possible.
I have a question from YouTube. How are adverse events from vaccinations during the rollout monitored? Someone keeping track of what's happening now?
There's something called the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, or VAERS, and every adverse event related to the vaccine, and even if it's not related to the vaccine, but that occurs to somebody who's vaccinated, is reported through that system. So yes, there's definitely people tracking that.
And not only that, anyone who is involved in the sort of the space, the medical space, the vaccine space, they're obligated to report things that they hear, even if they cannot document every single aspect of the disease. If they, for instance, I have a friend who works for a pharmaceutical company, and if they read something on Facebook, they've got to report it, and it's investigated and it's followed up. So these things are not taken lightly. They're not taken, just willy-nilly. It's really taken seriously, and medical professionals and healthcare providers take it very seriously. If they're hearing about some adverse effects, they're reporting them.
And I think, Yolanda, you should say out loud what you put in the chat, because I think that's important for people to know.
Are you talking about, that's where I did my research before I got the vaccine, VAERS? I went to the CDC's website, and then I went over to, what is it called, VAERS?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I went over to their website and I read, because I have anaphylaxis. So I usually carry 2 EpiPens with me. And every time I get the flu vaccine, I do have a mild reaction. It's a itching like in my muscle. And so I was concerned about the anaphylactic shock, because I do have that problem. I got my vaccine on Saturday. I had absolutely no reaction to the vaccine. I just want to say that.
And I think it's good to know that the information is available to people publicly. Like you can go to the website and look it up yourself.
Yeah, it actually tells you what the people were allergic to before they had a reaction and all of that. It's very clear. I have another question. Can you give an estimate about production of the vaccine and what are expected figures for those of us in the general population that may receive the vaccine summer 2021?
The easy answer is no. Cannot get this. I am sitting here with everyone else trying to figure out when we can get some of these vaccines out to the general population. I can give some insight on a couple of the bottlenecks that we've been seeing. So I think that there's probably a bottleneck in terms of each state has its own different system that they sign people up and kind of do that. That's one bottleneck. There's a bottleneck in terms of these first two vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer, have to be stored at very cold temperatures. So Pfizer has to be stored at freezers that go down to minus 70 degrees Celsius, and the Moderna is minus 20. So these are very cold freezers. These are not your typical freezer in your refrigerator. So that makes the transportation and the storage and where you can store, what facilities have those right types of freezers, makes it a little trickier. What we'll see as the year goes on and as more of these different types of vaccines start getting approved, proven to be safe, effective, and approved by the FDA, for instance, the one from Johnson & Johnson, that one, the third one, can be stored at refrigeration temperature. So you can now have many more sites storing, and you can have just regular refrigerated trucks transporting it, and that might make some of these pinch points a little better going forward.
All right, I have a really important question. So people of color have multiple conditions. Many people have multiple conditions that put them at risk for a more serious case of COVID. What does the data say about people with multiple conditions and the vaccine? Is there any data from the trials about how people of color, especially people of color who had multiple health conditions, did they have different outcomes from the vaccine?
I don't know, Ian, have you seen the data? I've seen the reports of the data.
I've seen the data in terms of the number of people with pre-existing conditions that are in the trial groups. It's fairly high, and yet still the number of people who have any kinds of adverse effects is fairly low. So I believe, especially in this last group, the Johnson & Johnson, they had up to 40% of people in their trial had pre-existing conditions. I think with the first two, it was a little bit lower. It was maybe more around like 10 or 20% of folks. So 10 or 20% of 75,000 is still, close to 10,000 folks. And then, again, the adverse reactions for the entire cohort was minuscule. It's 3-4 people. So I'd say the data indicates that those pre-existing conditions are not indicative of an adverse reaction to the vaccine. Tonya?
Yeah, I was asking you because I look specifically at the HIV data because I work mostly with people living with HIV. And we know that there was a concerted effort to make sure that people living with HIV were included in those trials. And I think there were the last thing I saw is about 6 or 7% of the people who participated in these trials of, tens of thousands of people were people living with HIV. And from what they presented, didn't seem to be a different response to the vaccine in people living with HIV. So I know at least for that pre-existing condition, there doesn't seem to be any contraindication. And we're offering it in the clinic. Well, we can't offer it in the clinic, but we're not discouraging people who meet the guidelines who are over 65 and living with HIV. We're recommending that they get vaccinated.
Thank you so much for that, Tonya. So we have a teacher question. I'm a teacher. The question, so of course, the question was sent to me. As a teacher, should I take the vaccine since I have a chance now, even if I'm still unsure about it? So I want to pose this to the panel, and then maybe I'll just kick back with like a sentence about why I got the vaccine, my first dose. If you didn't hear it, I'm not sure if that person was on when I said what I said. Who wants to take this one?
Go ahead, Tonya.
Well, I was thinking Yolanda should take it. She's a teacher. I'm not a teacher.
Well, I appreciate it. This is, of course, it's coming out of my mouth, so it's my opinion. We teach, we're around children. Children cannot get this vaccine. I really think it's important to be vaccinated. We're eventually going back in the building. Y'all know they're not gonna keep letting us stay at home. Stop playing. My decision to do it is just what the panel has been saying all along. It's like, I cannot afford to get COVID-19. I can't afford to risk giving it to my children. I can't afford to not live through or to have any pre-existing conditions related to COVID-19. So I got it. I think it's a good idea for every teacher to get it. I do not want to tell anybody. I really want to encourage people to get the vaccine, but I also want you to be able to have your own mind and make that decision yourself. I can tell you that only thing I had out of it was a sore arm. And so, and I feel a lot safer after getting it, because I was actually really scared before I got the vaccine. I just did not want to get COVID. So I hope that does help you, but eventually they're going to make us go back in the building. I mean, eventually it's going to be a fight. And so my thing is, I don't want to have to engage in a big fight. We're going to have to go back to school. Kids need us. So, but you will have to make that decision for yourself, though. I think it's best that you make that decision.
Yeah, I was going to say in North Carolina, unless you meet one of the other criteria, that it's not being offered to teachers, and the North Carolina Association of Teachers. There was one on the radio who runs the North Carolina Association of Teachers, I think, who was beautifully passionate about demanding that teachers have access to the vaccine before they go back into the classroom in order to open schools. And I trust her to know what she's talking about. I agree with you, Yolanda. I really feel like I'm not here to convince people to do things. I'm here to share my experience, and Ian to share his knowledge around what we know about the vaccine, so people can make informed decisions, and decisions based on information instead of fear and rumor. And then whatever that decision is your own.
Yeah, that's so true. You echo my sentiments perfectly. I think Nina has another question. What say you, Nina?
2 questions. I'm going to tee them both up because they're kind of related. So one is it true that these vaccines are like the most effective in history? Is that hype? Like, how do these vaccines compare to the other vaccines that we get when we're kids, like mumps and measles and stuff like that? And the other question is, are these current vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna that are out there right now, what do we know about how effective they are against these variants that we're hearing about, these other types of COVID?
So maybe I'll start. So the answer is yes, they are some of the most effective vaccines that we've seen. I think we have to go back to probably vaccines like smallpox and yellow fever and things where diseases we eradicated them because our vaccines were so good. The vaccines themselves have been proven over decades to be the most effective public health intervention in history. We don't have smallpox running around. We don't have yellow fever just running rampant. We don't have polio running rampant. Those are things that killed millions of people, that crippled hundreds of thousands of children. And that's, those things are long gone, and they're long gone because of vaccines and effective vaccines. So these are at 94, 95%. They're highly effective. I'll be honest, I was surprised at how effective. Typically in the last few years, if you could show something was 80% protective, that's a rock star vaccine. The typical flu vaccine that we've been manufacturing for the last few decades have waned somewhere between 50 to maybe the best ones 65, 70% effective. I mean, flu is a totally different disease, but I'm just giving you a sort of a baseline of what we've been used to in the medical space. So to have something that's 95%, yeah, it's great. The answer about how are they comparing to these new strains? So it's early days. These strains have just been sort of identified and sequenced in the last few weeks, and just trying to figure out which ones of these vaccines are going to still protect us. It appears that it's a hodgepodge. So the sort of the variant that they first saw that was coming first sequenced in the UK, these vaccines appear to be very protective against. But we're not sure about other variants that are circulating now. And with the new vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson, it's great against the variant that we have circulating here in the US. It's not so great against other ones circulating. So we're still gathering data. They're still doing those studies. They're still trying to figure out how protective the current Moderna and Pfizer vaccines will be against other variants.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Ian. Paul had a question that I think is really important. Should people with autoimmune illnesses like multiple sclerosis get the vaccine?
They should be talking to their doctor about whether or not they should be getting the vaccine.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think just that diagnosis alone is not enough information to make that decision. And that talking to your healthcare provider who knows you, who knows the course of your illness, who knows what treatments you've been on, and knows the status of your health is really the best way to make that decision.
Thank y'all so much. Nina, do you have another question?
I think there's one question from YouTube about where people can see any of the data that's out there about the trials.
I just put it in the chat.
Oh, great. The vaccine tracker.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's there. There's also, if you want to really get into the 70 pages submitted to the FDA, on the FDA's website, they have it prominently. I'm sure you just have to put in a keyword: vaccine, Moderna, vaccine, Pfizer, and they have slide decks. They have full-on reports. All that stuff is there too.
All right, Elena, can you find that for us and pop that thing in the chat for us?
Then I do have one more question from someone who actually had Bell's palsy 20 years ago and has had some recurrences, and she's trying to figure out if that might cause her condition to come back again. Tonya, as a provider, what would be your guidance?
Yeah, so I'm not her provider, so I can't give her specific guidance. But I would say I haven't seen any data that indicated that the Bell's palsy that people experienced who were in the trials was not what they would have experienced had they not been in the trials. It was the same percentage of people that would have gotten Bell's palsy in the general population. So there's no evidence that it's linked to the vaccine. So that's what I would, that's what we know for sure. I don't know, Ian, if you have more information than that.
No more than that. That sounds. That's what I would be looking at. For all of these adverse events that do happen to folks in the trial population, I do know that they're followed up by doctors, investigated, and no company wants to knowingly be responsible for giving participants anything that could make them, succumb to something like Bell's palsy. So it's thoroughly investigated. I have not seen what happened with those investigations, but I would be surprised if it was thoroughly investigated and they found that there was a link and then didn't tell anyone. It's a lot of this is being done in such a transparent way all over the world that because these are really legitimate fears and concerns. And I think the urge has been to provide more information than necessary, to do more investigations than necessary, because these are legit concerns. But we also have, legit concerns of folks succumbing to COVID as well.
Okay, I have one last question. Yolanda, is that okay, or am I button in line?
Oh, no, go ahead.
So with these new strains that are emerging, does that mean that like we'll have to get vaccinated over and over again for every new strain of COVID? And is that healthy? Like, is there a risk of having to get a lot of vaccines?
So my opinion, I think it's too early to tell whether or not we're going to need to get these vaccines over and over and over again. What I will say is that the sooner we can get everyone vaccinated, the sooner we can have this virus stop replicating rampantly throughout the population. And that means the lower number of strains that we will have circulating, the lower number of variables that we have not thought about or we're not vaccinated against. So key is, let's all get vaccinated as soon as possible. Fully informed, but clamping down on this virus being able to replicate, being able to mutate. And once that's done, then hopefully we won't need any other vaccines. We can just nip it in the bud.
Right. So you're saying the more people who are vaccinated, the fewer of these new strains we will see.
Yes.
And I'll put it in other words, because I'm like a really plain person. Like every time the virus makes copies of itself and or what we call replicate, it changes a little bit. And some of those changes don't make any difference in how well the vaccine can prevent infection. And some of those changes are big enough that the vaccine may or may not work. So I think whether we prevent replication by vaccination or if we prevent replication by wearing masks and social distancing, or if we do both, whatever we do that keeps the virus from continuing to go from person to person will reduce the number of chances it has to change or mutate enough that it wouldn't respond to a vaccine.
That's super helpful.
Yeah, it really is. So one of the things that we love doing with the coalition now, what we love honoring your time. If you want to continue to stay on, and if our panelists don't mind, we've got about 4 more questions. I just want you to know that we appreciate you for coming. And if you have to go, you don't have to tell us. You can just go ahead and take care of yourselves. If you want to stay on, if you have a question, you can leave it. But I just wanted to make sure that we made it clear that it's 8 o'clock and we want to honor your time. Are Ian and Tonya, are you okay with a couple more questions?
Yep.
Now, some of these questions have actually already been answered. But I want to make sure that people are clear on a couple of things. Ian, if you don't mind going over I know that you talked about getting the first dose, mm-hmm. and and how important that second dose is. We also have a question about, I see a question that says that they see healthcare workers. It's from Orielena. I see that healthcare workers wear full PPE when they are working with COVID patients. Does that mean that if I am vaccinated, I can carry the virus on my clothes back home? Can you address that? Because I think that that's the big concern is, and I've gotten a few questions about, is there virus in this actual vaccination?
Okay.
We talked about a little bit the ingredients in the beginning. I think some people might not have been here.
Okay. So there is no coronavirus in this vaccine. Getting vaccinated does not introduce the virus into your body. It introduces the genetic instructions for one surface protein for the virus, so that when your body encounters the virus in the future, if ever it does, it will recognize that outside envelope, the outside proteins, immediately attack it, neutralize it, and clear it from the body. So the vaccine itself is not introducing the virus is not introducing a new infection or anything. If we're talking about the PPE and seeing patients, maybe Tonya can kind of speak to that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. Healthcare providers wear full PPE when we're in the health facility to prevent transmission to ourselves, to be honest. But there isn't, I think early in the pandemic, people were very concerned about bringing home COVID like on their shoes or on their clothes. But experience has taught us that there haven't been cases of COVID being transmitted that way, that it really is a respiratory transmission of a virus. So there's not that main concern. Nonetheless, I'm a person, if I've been at work all day and I come home, I want to change into something that's not what I've been wearing in a hospital all day long, typically. So I think that's a natural desire, but there isn't concern about bringing COVID home on an inanimate object.
Thank you so much for clearing that up. I have a question that has a little bit of a narrative to it, and I wanted to save it for the end. My 78-year-old mother has been able to stay fairly isolated since the beginning of the pandemic, and myself and my partner take care of all of her shopping and transport her to medical appointments as needed. I know that she is allergic to both heparin and I guess this is Boston, I'm not sure, it's a medication. Given that she struggles with anemia, pulmonary hypertension, and 4 different heart conditions, I frankly think she may be safer as is versus taking a chance of being one of the rare ones to have an allergic reaction to the vaccine. Is there a reason I shouldn't wait until there is a one-shot vaccine readily available for her?
Tonya, you want this one?
Sure. I was like, I have lots of thoughts. And I'm going to not give advice because I don't know this person, but I'm thinking like, if this was my mother and I was in the same situation, and I do have parents with chronic conditions that I worry about, and I do take them to their healthcare appointments. And part of my fear actually was, as a healthy person who might have acquired COVID and not had any symptoms, that I could be bringing them COVID unknowingly. So I was terrified. They were always making fun of me because I'm like masked up and, in the car with them, and they're just like, relax. I'm like, I cannot relax because you are my parents and you're the only 2 I have. I want to keep you. And so I think if my parents had that many chronic conditions and I needed to take them outside the home for any reason, they would be exposed to me and anyone else they're encountering at their medical visits. And I know people are being super careful. I know they're doing bizarre things like checking their temperature, which I don't understand because we know that half of COVID is transmitted from people who don't have symptoms. So I think it's a beautiful gesture, but doesn't tell you that the people who are in the waiting room with you don't also have COVID. I would want my parents to be vaccinated because I would know when they got the vaccine, there would be healthcare providers there. They would be asked to wait for a certain period of time. They told me to wait 30 minutes. I waited an hour because I was checking my email. You can stay there as long as you want to be monitored, and that people would know immediately what to do if there was a reaction. And I would feel much safer with that than worrying about my mother or father potentially getting COVID with all those underlying conditions and being pretty certain that they would have a very low chance of survival if they did. That's how I would make that decision. I don't know, Ian, if you want to speak to your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything you said. I, have the same fears for my own family members. And hearing a situation like that, it's funny. My fear would be the exact opposite. I'd be the exact opposite. If ever they did encounter a COVID, probably from someone who they trusted who did not know they had it. Because 50% of people get it not knowing someone else is asymptomatic and they're giving it to them. Right, chances of survival are very low, which is the complete opposite because they think the chances of just an adverse reaction are extremely low. Chances of survival if they get COVID are going to be low. Chances of death are high. So I'm starting now because I'm a little thrown off by that. But I would just say I totally agree with you, Tony.
Right. Thank you all so much. There are two more questions, and then I think that we can close this. There's one has to do with children. How are children under 18 protected when they can't take the vaccine, as many areas want to open schools in March, well before everyone is vaccinated?
So yeah, this is probably a good time to talk about vaccinating children, those under 18. So from everything that I've read, they are either sort of arranging the trials right now or in the early stages of trials for children. And so the results from those should be coming out in mid to late spring in terms of vaccinating children. I think what they're doing is sort of going stepwise right now. It's anyone 18 to 14, that cohort. They're seeing folks at that age range, looking at the efficacy and the safety, and then as the months go by, they're going to get younger and younger. So soon we'll have some data. We'll have data just like we have for adults on safety, on how effective it is, and then can really by the summer or fall start thinking about really doing vaccinating children as a more standard practice. What happens now to protect them is the same thing that we've been doing as a society to protect ourselves for nearly all of 2020, with the masks, social distancing, washing of hands, avoiding crowds, and avoiding lots of crowded indoor activities.
Excellent. So we have another question from an educator, Kenya. She says, for those educators who return to work in the school building, would you suggest we purchase a PPE uniform, i.e. scrubs, shoes, head coverings, etc., as if we're entering into a healthcare facility? It's an excellent question.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can respond to that. I teach at a medical school. I haven't been back to campus since COVID started, and they haven't made me yet, so we'll see what happens. But my plan is to not wear more than I would wear to the clinic. So I go into a clinic that's not a COVID ward. We see just people who come in with whatever their routine care is or their urgent visit. We don't test them for COVID. It's possible someone could have COVID, but it's not a COVID ward. And what I wear is a regular surgical mask, either goggles or a face shield. I have on scrubs, but I don't have to wear a scrub. That's not one of the requirements of work. So it's all about protecting here, right? Protecting your nose and your mouth. I think a head covering and all that other stuff would just make me hot. I'm a menopausal woman. Wearing PPE alone is enough to make me have a hot flash. So I think all the other stuff wouldn't provide any more protection than protecting the places where COVID is likely to get in. I don't know, Ian, if you want to comment on that.
No, that sounds about right to me. I will say there's one other thing. There's some studies that I hear are on the horizon about to be published around masks and efficacy of double masks or different types of masks. I think one of the things that we starting to learn more and more about is having just a cloth mask is good, but not great. Having a surgical mask is great, but not the best. And having some of these N95s, or there are other ones that have been manufactured called KN95s or other types of masks, are probably the best that you can get. So we're talking about gradations of protection. So I would say that if there is extra worry, stay tuned to some of the facts and figures coming out about different types of masks that will be more effective. If you don't have access to the real fancy masks, then double masking might also add extra layer of protection as well.
Yeah,
and
Ian,
can I add to? I'm sorry. Can can I just add to that, that the most important thing, the thing that makes the N95 mask so amazing is not that it's amazing. It's that it's fit tested to your face. So there's a seal that doesn't allow anything in or out. So the most important thing about your mask, okay, I won't say the most important thing, but one of the crucial things about the mask is that it fit your face. Because you could have the best 18-layer mask on earth, but if it has like big places where air comes in and out, it's not going to be as protective as a 2 or 3-layer mask that is fit around your face. So the fit is really, really important.
Yeah, I needed that because I'm wearing like 2 and 3 masks these days. I am for real.
I would say, and I heard this from the infectious disease head of our department. He's like, one good fitting mask that doesn't allow air around is better than multiple poor fitting masks that allow air around.
I'm gonna have to get me a mask fitted now. So we have a couple of questions, but one of them has to do with the reaction. And I know, Tonya, I know you talked about having a little bit of a reaction with your second dosage. And then we want to talk about, there's this one question I've been waiting to the end to ask from a white person about how to influence people of color to get the vaccine. The first question is, Paul said, I took the first dose of the Pfizer BioNTech this Saturday with no reaction. Will there be any reaction or effect on my second dosage?
I don't know. About 40 or 50% of people will have a reaction on their second dose. I didn't have any reaction after my first dose, just like you, Yolanda, and like the other person. I was like, oh, well, then I started worry, like, is my immune system doing what it needs to do? But then I was reassured because after my second dose, my immune system communicated with me that yes, it is active and doing what it needs to do. So I'd say you have like a 50-50 chance on the second dose of having a reaction. But I've never heard of anybody having symptoms that last more than a few days, even if they have a reaction.
I think this last question is important. And I have my own opinion. So it will be very interesting to hear from the panel. How do you recommend speaking with vaccine skeptical members of the Black, Indigenous, people of color community about the merits of vaccines and the benefits of being vaccinated? Note, I am a white male.
I don't have data, I have feelings. Can I share my feelings?
What are your feelings?
My feelings are complicated, but the first is that it's really, unless you run the health department, which maybe you do, it's really not your responsibility to like make people do things. I think, and even as a healthcare provider, when I see a patient who I have a one-on-one relationship with and my job is to promote their health, I feel like it's a relationship in which my job is to give them all the information they need to make an informed decision. And sometimes people don't make the decision I think they should make. And it's still their lives and they get to make that decision. So I think if you're somebody who wants to help promote the vaccine, I think the best thing to do is to share information, help people know where they can go and get the information themselves. It's not filtered through somebody else that they may or may not trust. And then allow them to make the decision that's best for them based on their access to good information. Those are my thoughts.
I can appreciate that. Elena said, feelings are data.
Thank you.
Ian, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, so I think the other piece I would add is, so yes, I like the idea of, not necessarily your job to be forcing people to do anything. Speak with the data that you have, find the data. I think, well, in addition to that, I think it's helpful to learn for ourselves where these fears are coming from and what they're based on. So for instance, if someone who's Black and is, for instance, fearful because they say, oh, because of the Tuskegee experiment, go ahead and find out what the Tuskegee experiment was all about. Learn about that. Learn about where that fear comes from. Learn about how that fear has actually been distorted over time, and what the Tuskegee experiment actually was or was not. It was not the government giving Black men syphilis, for instance. It was a totally different atrocity where they found Black men with syphilis and didn't treat it. But understanding where those fears come from is also just as important, I think, as finding where the data comes from on these current vaccines, and how the alternative to a 1 in a million chance of having an adverse reaction is a 1 in 4 chance of death. Understanding that, communicating that, but also and understanding where the real fear is based. There might be some distortion over time of that fear, but how that there's a legitimate thread that runs through that. I think that's also really helpful.
Yes, I agree 100%, Ian. And I would say, even if people don't mention Tuskegee, they know about their own experience getting healthcare. And they know that when they have pain, their pain is not seen as legitimate. They know that they are treated differently than perhaps other people who go to get care. And that we can't pretend like that's not true and that doesn't inform how people make decisions about what they trust and don't trust about healthcare. We have to start from that place, I think, and acknowledge that. Otherwise people won't, I mean, you're saying like what I see every day is not actually what I see every day, and I'm never going to believe you.
Yeah, that's, see, y'all said everything I was feeling and so much more. Ian, thanks for dropping that knowledge about the Tuskegee experiment. I really appreciated that. So I think that it's good to bring this to a peaceful conclusion. I really would like to do more of these if we can in the future, not so distant future. If you have more questions, you can actually, we have I think that the link is in here, but if not, we'll put the link in here for our questions. And then, we might just harass Ian and Tonya a little bit to answer a few more questions. Is there are there any last words anyone would like to say before we leave?
I want to say thank you for doing this, for providing a forum for community to ask questions and get them answered. And I think it's hard for people to get answers to their questions that they trust. And so thank you for that leadership.
And I'm gonna get real country and be like, thank y'all for coming to answer those questions, because I couldn't have did that. And thank you, all of you who came or watched us on YouTube. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that this was something that was helpful, if not pivotal, just helpful. Thank you.
And your excellent questions. Thank you for your excellent questions.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Nina. You're so amazing. All right, y'all. Have a nice evening.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have a great night.
Good night. Oh, you're welcome. Good night, everybody.